of the study session for the Aurora City Council for Monday, March 7th, 2022 is called to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Kaufman.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Bergen.
Here.
Councilmember Coombs.
Present.
Councilmember Gardner.
Here.
Councilmember Drinsky.
Here.
Councilmember Lawson.
Here.
Councilmember Mercado.
Present.
Councilmember Medina.
Here.
Councilmember Murillo. Councilmember Murillo. Councilmember Sundberg. Councilmember Zabonik.
Here.
There's a quorum.
Announcement for the call-in line.
Thank you for joining tonight's Aurora City Council study session. If you are listening on the phone, please note public comments are not taken during study sessions. The phone line is in listen-only mode. City Council welcomes comments at regular council meetings on both matters appearing on the agenda and during public invited to be heard. The phone line opens for sign-up on those evenings at 6 p.m. Thank you.
There's no, excuse me, no mayor's update, no issue update. First presentation is Aurora Public Schools strategic planning presentation. Councilmember Sundberg, is he present? I guess Dr. Ann Kiki, school board member, Aurora Public Schools. Let me defer to you.
I'm not sure that Dr. Kiki made it on. This is.
I am.
Oh, good, you're here.
Hi.
I was going to say, I'm going to start off the presentation. I'm Debbie Gherkin, president of the Aurora Public Schools Board of Education, and I am joined tonight by Dr. Ann Kiki and also Superintendent Rico Munn. We just wanted to take just a few minutes of your time tonight to give you an overview and an update of our Blueprint APS processes that's been going on for quite a while. So if you could take us to slide 3, please. There we go. So we do want to provide this overview of the work that we've been doing on Blueprint APS actually for quite some time. And the council has been involved in this work. New members may not know, but the rest of you will remember that we've come and talked to you before about what our process was going to look like. Mayor Laguerre presented to our regional design teams, forming that partnership as how we were going to work together going forward. So we just wanted to come tonight to update you a little bit on some of those recent changes and give you a deeper understanding of the process. So next slide, please. What is Blueprint APS? We did send you a link that would give a lot of great detail about this, and so you can find that in your email. But just in a nutshell, Blueprint APS is the process that we are using to develop this long-range educational and facilities plan that's going to be responding to our changing enrollment. We also want to be proactive in this and make sure that we are asking, getting the interest of the community as we go along. Next slide, please. We needed this new plan because our long-range facilities plan had expired in 2017. It was an old plan that was based on old assumptions, such as kids were always going to be, enrollment was always going to be increasing, and 85% of our kids would be attending traditional Aurora public schools, and that we'd had this steady increase in school-age kids, and that would all be concentrated on the west side of town. Well, none of that is true anymore. Things have changed. We have declining enrollment, especially on the west side, with increases on the east side that are likely to come So we needed this new facilities plan to fit our new reality. Next slide, please. So we needed the community's input and we wanted it. So we went out and we spent a good deal of time really fleshing that out. In May through December of 2018 was our phase one, where we got at least over 1,000 community members giving us feedback through focus groups and community forums and surveys and one-on-one interviews. We had 2 community task forces then that created 5 potential scenarios for our educational and facilities future of APS. And then phase 2 was January through May 2019, where we took that input from more than 2,000 other community members and narrowed the scenarios down to 3 possibilities. And we did that through open houses and board community outreach and lots more surveys. The board affirmed the support for Blueprint APS framework at that time. And now we are in phase 3, which has started in June 2019, in which we determined our regional specializations, and we are now implementing those changes that we wanted to bring forth. Next slide, please. So a community vision emerged, and that community vision was to look at regional specializations across the district based on the assets that were in each one of these regions. Our community partners that we had already acknowledged and others that would be coming along the way. We wanted to have magnet schools. Our community said to us that they wanted choice, some kind of choice, some sort of thing that would increase that engagement, but not necessarily charter schools, district-run magnet schools. They also wanted an emphasis not only on college, but also on career readiness, on technical training, on getting ready to work right immediately following graduation. They acknowledged that, of course, we would need to build new schools on the east side of town, and we would have to do something different by repurposing schools on the west side. Next slide, please. So what we did was we came up with, we created this community vision with regional specializations, community partners, magnet schools, career readiness, building schools, and repurposing schools. For some reason, I have lost my ability to see the screen. Are you still hearing me?
We can hear you and we see the map.
Okay, very good. Let's go with that then. So what you see is the map of our regional specializations. There are 7 of them. So start with the left to right, top to bottom. So in our first region, we have One Health, and that is all about not just people in terms of their health, but also animals and plants and our environment, the health of our environment, looking at all those aspects of health in one common area. And of course, Anschutz Medical Center and many other medical folks out there are great community partners for us. Region 2 is business management and hospitality. Focusing on hospitality industry and business, restaurants, lodging, travel, events. Of course, the Gaylords out there, Amazon's out there. You can imagine all the different kinds of partnerships we could have there. Region 3 is visual and performing arts, exactly what it sounds like. And we have our partners there with GAVA, with Fox Theater, with Vintage Theater, and more. The next region we have is STEAM. We hear a lot about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, but the A is just as important here for the arts. So we're using not just the left side of the brain, but also the right. Another region is technology, engineering, and design. 21st century communication and skills, studying languages, technologies, science, and engineering. We also have entrepreneurship and invention, and finally, project-based learning, all wonderful things that are so important for all of our kids. And these were regional designs that were dreamed of by our community, brought forth to other committees that looked at all the ideas, brought them to Long Range Facilities Committee, who brought them to leadership team, who brought them to the superintendent, who brought them to us. And we affirmed as a board that this would be our regional designs, our specializations going forward. So then, of course, we had to decide, where do we start? So if you go to the next slide, this map has blue and red dots on it, primarily. You'll notice that the blue dots, those dark blue dots, indicate that the building to student ratio capacity is in really good shape. These schools with the dark blue dots indicate that the enrollment there is above 90% of the capacity of that building. On the other hand, the circles that are dark red show us that there are buildings that have a much lower enrollment rate. In fact, they are below 65% capacity and in critical need. So you can see through that map that the red dots, the ones that indicate schools that are below 85 or 65% capacity, are on the west side of town primarily, and enrollment is stronger going east. Next slide, please. So that leaves us to some critical questions. We're at the point of saying, what do we do now? If we stay with the status quo, it is not only inefficient for us, it's also unsustainable in the long run. And most importantly here, it's inequitable for our children. So at this point, I'm going to turn our presentation over to Dr. Kiki, who's going to dig a little deeper into how it's inefficient, unsustainable, and inequitable. Dr. Kiki?
Thank you so much, Madam President, and hello, everyone, and council members. Yes, it is inefficient and unsustainable and inequitable. That's why we are taking action. And what do we mean by inefficient? Next slide, please. Given the decline of enrollment, APS can no longer use its facility to their maximum potential as currently designed. Just like many large districts in the state and across the country, APS is facing the same issue. That is the declining of enrollment. And that's due mainly to declining in birth rate, gentrification, and rising in housing. In the last 5 years, APS has lost about 3,600 students. And we project a 2% decline in enrollment next year district-wide. As building decrease, its capacity, the utilization of the building becomes more and more expensive, and that is a fact. In Region 1, for example, which is part of Councilwoman Murillo, we are experiencing overall 17% decline in enrollment. And every year, we keep losing kids. If we wanted to take it building per building, we're looking at 25% decline in enrollment per building per year. That's pretty significant. Next slide, please. And when we say it is unsustainable, we are talking about the budget part, the money part, the funding part. 3 years ago, the costs related to low enrollment and underutilized building were estimated at $21 million. In the last 3 years, small enrollment schools have doubled. And really, small enrollment schools are not bad per se, but can we really, can we sustain that model? And the answer is probably not. Next slide, please. And it brings us to the issue of equity. And when we talk about equity here, we are looking at student outcome from the student outcome point of view. So bigger schools have greater scalability, and that's the truth. That's a fact. Whereas small schools don't. And unfortunately, those have to bear the brunt of making the decision of cutting resources for them, which really makes it inequitable. Next slide, please. Now, because those things are not, because the status quo, again, is not equitable, it's not sustainable, and it's not efficient, the blueprint APS gives us the framework for repurposing. And those include consolidating schools, adjusting boundaries, adjusting grade levels, closing schools, opening magnets, and determining all new purpose. So when we talk about adjusting closing schools, for example, we look at Peoria, which has been repurposed to a P8 magnet school, namely Charlesboro, which we are advertising right now. And we are also looking at, in your ward, Councilwoman Murillo, we're looking at Linol, which is also going to be repurposed. And then when we talk about determining all new purpose, this is going to come at a later time when we are going again to involve the community to make decisions about what we are going to do with some of our buildings. Next slide, please. Taking a high-level system approach rather than school-by-school approach is the way we wanted to go here in APS. We did not want to pin one school community against another. That's why we are looking at everything per region. That is also that will also help us maximize our resources and support for every student in the regions, and then also provide more flexibility in the long term to respond to additional enrollment shifts. Next slide, please. Decisions so far. And if you don't mind, can you move to the next slide for that? I want to bring back this map that you were looking at earlier. So let's look at so far what decisions have been made. So let's look at Region 2, which would be part of Councilman Sundberg's ward. We are going to build a new P8 in the Northwest Gaylord area. That's going to be in the school year of 23-24. And then when we look at Region 3, that will be part of Councilman Medina. And we are going to replace Linol, repurpose 6th Avenue, repurpose South, which is actually underway. This is our online facility for our students that are taking classes online. We do have resources out there as far as teachers for them. We are also repurposing, or we repurpose Peoria and Aurora Central High Schools to Charlesboro Visual and Performing Arts Campus. And every time, I want you to think every time there is a repurpose, there is also a boundary realignment. Region 5, when we look at Region 5 back to part of Councilman Sundberg, we are going to build an educational facility, potentially a magnet, near the Horizon development. That is going to be in school year 24-25. And then Region 6, which is our entrepreneurship and invention, that is part of Councilman Marcano and also part of Councilman Medina. We are going to, the decision is to remodel Virginia Court, repurpose Century, and repurpose Wheeling to Clara Brown Entrepreneurial Academy, which is going to be opening next year as well. Again, every time we repurpose, we have to realign boundaries. Next slide, please. So what are we up next? Here soon, or let me say it this way, the district has recommended that we close Sable, we close Paris. Again, we realign boundaries. We repurpose Sable and Paris as well. And then that we open One Health Innovation Center on the North campus, on the campus of North Middle School. And then a One Health Innovation Center would also include a space for One Health programming for our students in grade K-12, as well as a space for P-Tech. Next slide, please. Next slide. So what is a P-Tech? It is, the acronym stands for Pathways to Technical Early College High School, and that will be for grade 9 to 14. And students will be receiving mentoring, job shadowing, internship, pre-apprenticeship, and other workplace skills and experiences. It will be open to all students with special focus on, and with a special focus on encouraging enrollment of students who are socioeconomically and racially diverse, and first-generation college students and English learners as well. That will be the focus. Next slide, please. And moving ahead, we are taking a proactive decision-making and we are monitoring regional needs. What does that mean? We are way ahead of the discussion. We are making decision ahead of time. The conversations that other districts are starting now, we have started it years ago, and we keep moving at a pace that is going to be very beneficial to the district as a whole in the long run. And next slide. That is the end of our presentation. Thank you so much for having us. We are open for questions.
Mayor?
Mayor Pro Tem.
Oh, yes, thank you so much for the presentation. It looks like you guys have really had to do a lot of work in consideration of challenges and changes in the district. So I just had a question on, you said that the enrollment is going stronger towards the east. And I was wondering, when you said the enrollment is low, you know, birth rate and that type of thing, but we also have higher birth rates in some of our communities. Do you have any data on if they're leaving to go to charter schools, private schools? Do you have that data?
I am gonna ask Superintendent Munn to chime into that when it comes to data. Superintendent, please.
Thanks, Dr. Kiki. Mayor Pro Tem Bergen, we have no shortage of data on everything. But, you know, what we are seeing are three factors that really impact our overall enrollment. One is the declining in birth rates since roughly 2008. And with that, we're also seeing a declining yield. And yield is what we consider of the number of school-age kids in the community, how many of them are attending traditional APS schools. So we're seeing both that declining birth rate and declining yield. What we know is that about 14% of kids in APS attend charter schools. So they are, that is a rate out of our traditional schools. And then we also are seeing a certain number of what we call an exchange in and out of district. So every year, a certain number of kids, particularly kids who live right on the boundaries, may attend DPS or Cherry Creek. But we also then get back a number of kids in that exchange as well. And we want to compete better in that exchange by looking at some more choices through these magnet schools.
And then my other question is, you mentioned small enrollment schools have doubled. Did you mean, so, oh, I get it now. I'm answering my own question on that. So just a concern, when you're doing this reorganization and consolidation, and you mentioned magnet school in Ward 2, what about kids that would not necessarily be right for a magnet school, that just need more of the traditional? Would they go somewhere else?
Yes, they would. The magnet schools will be by application. And so parents would have that choice to be able to say, I'd like my child to be in this particular school with this particular specializations. For instance, the visual and performing arts. If they don't want that choice, then the boundaries are enlarged and set so that children would go to this other school instead.
Okay, and then in the magnet schools, is there a career track? Because you mentioned the partnerships with businesses and organizations, which I think is really great. I think that's important. Not everybody wants to go to college and so forth. So would they have some sort of connection there with the magnet schools?
The elementary magnet schools are not designed as a career track per se. Ultimately, our high schools are still comprehensive high schools. We want kids to engage directly with their education through lots of relevant experiences, and it might be relevance for them is the arts, and others it might be through different avenues. However, if you look at some of the design, the P-Tech program clearly is a career ladder and a career opportunity. And then the pathway for the visual performing arts for those students who choose to continue in that pathway into Central, that would be a career opportunity for them.
Okay, thank you. I guess the magnet school you said is only for the lower grades. Is that correct?
There are different designs for different schools.
Okay, thank you so much for the presentation.
Further questions?
Mayor, Council.
Councilmember Medina.
Thank you, sir. Yes, I just have a question. My wife teaches in Ward 1, where a lot of those schools are in the red. So are all of these schools that are in red going to be phased out?
No, what we're looking at is a comprehensive approach, a system-wide approach to looking at in this region by region, what would make the most sense. We want to make sure that all our kids have great opportunities. And so in order to maintain things that are efficient, sustainable, and equitable, then we'd look across that region. Not every school is going to close. Absolutely not.
And also, Councilman Medina, we took the pulse in the community to kind of figure out what exactly would be beneficial for that region. So no, again, not all of the schools are going to be closed.
Further questions?
Thank you.
Further questions? Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. I do have a couple questions here. So when I typed it into chat, but y'all probably didn't see that, what is the student to teacher ratio in some of those schools that are under full enrollment? Because it's my understanding that lower student teacher ratios actually benefit students. And especially when we're talking about in some of these communities that are historically marginalized, disenfranchised, and otherwise under-resourced. So I see that as potentially actually a good thing. Could you enlighten us on what that ratio looks like?
Well, certainly. Oh, go ahead, Superintendent.
Oh, sorry. Ratio is slightly different from class size. So all of our buildings are staffed based upon a ratio of adults to students. And so all of the staffing ratios are identical across all of our buildings. Class size is a function of what you're, to a certain degree, how many kids happen to be in third grade at one school versus another. And trying to look at how that individual staff or principal may staff those class sizes. What we've seen, however, is if you're in a low enrollment school versus what we consider a moderate enrollment school, the class size difference is rather small. It's perhaps 1.5 student difference in that because of the ratio formula that we do the staffing.
Okay, thank you for that.
Further questions?
And
I'm sorry.
Mayor, if I may.
Please proceed.
Oh, you're good. Thank you. So I've also heard from our residents about Century Elementary here in Ward 4, which I believe y'all have probably gotten emails and calls from. They were curious if there'd be an opportunity, depending on how the school gets repurposed, to partner with the city for a senior center and maybe even adding a police substation. Is that something that you have all discussed internally?
That will come at a later time. It will be discussed when the time is right, and we will involve the whole community and probably come back to you all as well. But that will be definitely discussed at a later time.
All right, wonderful. Thank you.
Further questions?
Mayor.
Councilmember Murillo.
Thanks, Mayor. Hi, Ann. Hi, Debbie. It's good to see you again. And thank you for the presentation. So I guess going back to kind of the map, I too have concerns that a lot of the red dots are in the Northwest Ward 1 area. I understand that perhaps not every single one is closed. When you guys say equity, though, are you guys considering a proportionate amount of closures per region? Because what I'm concerned about, and I had, I've had folks ask me many questions about these school closures, most recently around Sable, but there were decisions made with the last board composition, now with this new board composition, and it just seems to be highly concentrated in one geographic area. So when I think of equity, that to me is a concern. Can you comment on that a little bit?
Rico, do you want to start with that?
Sure. Thank you, Councilwoman Murillo. A proportionate closure across the district, we don't believe that would be equitable. Really, we're trying to make sure we have appropriate educational facilities in close proximity to where kids are. And we, of course, have no ability to control where kids are, where they live. We try and respond to what's happening in the city and the dynamics there. And so we are, of course, are looking at how do we maintain appropriate facilities in response to wherever kids are in the district.
Mayor, I have a couple
Please proceed. Please proceed.
Yeah, so, I would disagree. I think when you think of all the other ways that a community might be impacted, this is another, layer when we talk about disenfranchised communities. And we know there are other factors. You guys kind of mentioned them at the beginning of this conversation, things that I understand that you all don't have control over. But to me, pulling out resources away from areas that probably have been under-resourced, I think is really concerning. I've also heard concerns around, how we accomplish that. So if there is the proposal so one of the schools, Paris, is in my district, actually not too far from where I live, Sable, and Paris actually, but is there a plan? I've heard concerns with how the work is done too, right? That there's, not a lot of support and structure when there is a closure. There's a lot of concerns that teachers won't stay, once there's a closure announcing. I'm just concerned on how we do the work And that's some of the feedback that I've heard from constituents on when there's a school closure. How does that get implemented?
So, Councilwoman Murillo, I just wanted to point something out here. Smaller schools don't always mean the best for our students, because because of budget issues, we have to pull out resources because it takes a lot of money to run those buildings, unfortunately, and that's a fact. Secondly, when it comes to human resources, right, or capital, yes, we certainly and definitely do not want to lose any of our teachers, and the district tries its best to keep them. So today I went to visit Virginia Court, for example, and I was talking to the principal, and Wheeling came, in the conversation, and I did ask the same question. So what are we going to do? Are we going to try and employ some of the teachers from Wheeling? And the response was, yes, we are open to that. And because we know that there are amazing teachers there and we want to keep them. And it's the same throughout the district. No lie. It's the same. We try to keep our workforce because we know they're important for our students. So it's not the school is closing, bye. No, it's what can we do to keep you? What can we do for you to stay and work maybe in a different building or facility? So.
The same goes for supporting families and students as they transition to other schools as well. There are supports and ways that both schools, principals and staff at both schools work together to make the smoothest transition possible.
Okay, further questions?
I have another follow-up.
Please proceed.
Thanks, Mayor. Thank you. I understand that there's probably processes in place and, encouraging of staff to stay with the district. And I know that you guys are trying, to do this in the best way possible. I just am hearing a different narrative from boots on the ground, right? From the actual teachers, from the actual students. So I raise that as a concern because I know that that's feedback that you all care about. Yes. And, I maintain that is a concern of mine, just given the concerns and ongoing conversations I'm having with families. And then last, I just wanted to just offer, I know we have to move on and I don't want to take up all the time, but one of the things that I would love to offer and get a better sense is, when you say repurposing, is that plan of how you will repurpose happen before it's closed? So when I think of repurposing, it's a matter of operations, right? We've talked about a very detailed, explicit plan and how we are trying to be, and we have different opinions about what equitable means potentially, but do people know what this land and this facility will be used as before it's closed? I think that's pertinent. I would love to see if there's a way for the city of Aurora, school board to work together. I know we talk about supporting our small businesses. You all have a commercial kitchen in a school. We even have a restaurant incentive program, because we have a lack of, commercial kitchen space. Can we work with our small business development center to create more of a community hub, right? Is there ways that we can help offset those costs before the decision is made to close down a school? Because again, if you guys want to keep kind of the costs, and it's not easy, right? I don't mean to minimize that. We have a very big budget. I understand the difficulties there, but is there a way that our city administration and all of our programming, we've just talked about youth violence prevention of late, right? And the need, one of the feedback was a need for youth to congregate safely, right? Could a school after school hours be a space where, a local nonprofit organization is fulfilling our charge with our youth violence prevention efforts and, using that facility, right? I know you guys don't have an easy decision by any means. I don't envy your decision, but I have so many concerns just given the high concentration of those red dots in my district, and where I can be supportive or where we can ask staff to work with your staff to find some of these innovative solutions before we're closing schools, just to try to see if we might be able to come up with these innovative ideas. I think it's worth a shot over the next year or so. And then let's have that conversation. But I said my piece. Thank you. Thank you both for coming, and you as well, Superintendent Munn. I appreciate it.
Further questions?
Mayor Jurenski.
Councilmember Jurenski.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you guys for the presentation tonight. I'm just wondering, are you seeing an uptick in homeschooling?
We saw,
I don't have those data in front of me.
Councilwoman Jurenski, that is a tough question to answer because of the pandemic, because what's homeschooling versus what's remote schooling temporarily is a little unclear at this point in time. I would say that during the height of the pandemic, obviously, we saw a lot more families wanting remote options. And as we have increased our in-person, we've seen most of those families return. I think it'll probably be another year before I can really tell you whether there's a true transition to homeschooling. But at this stage, I do not see data trends that indicate that.
I guess I'm
Further question? Oh, I'm sorry. Please proceed.
I guess so. I mean, if there's not much data and it's hard to differentiate between the virtual learning and the homeschooling, where do you think all these kids have gone? Why are there such low enrollment rates in some of these schools?
Well, again, this is a phenomenon we're seeing across the country, and the biggest contributor is a decline in birth rates. And obviously, that stays in our system for 12 years once you have that dip. And so when you have a couple of years of that, which we have seen, then that is a systemic depressor.
Sure. And let me just say, as someone who grew up in this city, that, you have the reality is you have an aging population in the older parts of town. And where there's new growth, we see new development, where new schools are going to have to be built. So resources have to be shifted. Further questions or comments? Seeing none.
Mayor, sorry.
Councilmember Coombs, and we need to, we're going to have to wrap this up fairly soon. Councilmember Coombs.
Okay, sure. I will be quick. First part is a comment just on the P-TECH, the kind of populations that were targeted for being focused into that programming. I do think that we should be thoughtful and cautious about even the appearance of something like what historically was tracking of lower income and disabled students and students of color into technical education and away from college, which is honestly how that came off. So I think I'm sure that you all are taking that into consideration, but I did want to call that out because it's very important. And then my question is just, it looks like as far as the South and East, Columbia Middle School, which is in my ward, is one of the lower enrollment schools. So, and I didn't hear anything specifically about what the plan was there.
We're taking it one region at a time. And so the conversation hasn't focused around Columbia yet. In regard to the first part of your question, I take that to heart completely regarding the P-TECH program. I do know that in all those conversations at Central, at North, where I was meeting with folks before we started this, there was a whole community of people who were really hoping that we'd focus and provide opportunities for these populations of kids. And so based on community input, we were trying to focus in this direction as well. But I totally understand where you're coming from there.
The further is there another question? Further questions or comments? We do need to move on.
Yeah, Mayor.
Councilmember O'Connell.
Thank you, sir. Hopefully this one's quick. So I guess my final question is, why are we closing schools instead of shifting the boundaries to send more kids to the existing to the existing schools? Because what it sounds like is we're going to be building new schools out east, which makes sense as the population grows. But then we're going to close schools in the west side of town, and I guess shuffle those kids to the center, and then I guess maybe shuffle some of those kids from the center to the east. Is that kind of the idea? Just from a logistics standpoint, I'm a little puzzled.
That's why we're looking at it region by region. So for instance, in Region 1, it's a high concentration of schools with those dark red circles. So we don't want kids on buses for hours going to schools closer into the center of town or on the east side. We want to have great schools on the west side of town as well. And so we are shifting. We've got to close some schools, shift some population, some boundaries, in order to be able to have these sustainable schools that meet the needs of our kids in that region as well.
All right, thank you.
Further questions or comments? Well, I want to thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation. And I know these are really tough decisions that we don't have to make, and you do, but we're willing to certainly have input, and we appreciate you really initiating this presentation to us in what are some very difficult decisions, but are the right decisions that I think have to be made. I mean, again, when I grew up in this city, all those homes in Northwest Aurora were young families. And now there are still some there, but not as many. But when we look at the new areas, it tends to be all over again young families. And so we have to shift resources accordingly. But thank you very much. And thank you for all you do to educate our children.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you. Consent calendar.
Thank you.
Item number, is there any objection to moving the consent calendar forward? Item number 3A through 3G. Is there objection?
Mayor,
Councilman, Mayor Pro Tem.
I just have a quick question on 3F.
Okay. Please proceed.
And it's the update on the truck route map. And I don't know if we have Carly available.
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Carly.
Hello.
I know that, you have all the really a couple new streets or truck routes on there on that map. My question was on Alexander Road, because obviously I do know that you say they can still use roads if it's the only option for them to use. So is that what Alexander Road falls into? It's not a truck route, but it right now it's necessary for them to go there for construction purposes?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. So construction vehicles, for new developments and just in their daily activities need to be able to access the site that they're going to. So for construction for, a water project or the rec center, heavy vehicles will need to use some additional roads. But this map is really just intended to be where vehicles need to use the roadways if they're going through the city, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Any further questions on the consent calendar? Seeing none, is there any objection to moving the consent calendar item number 3A through 3G forward? Seeing no objection, the consent calendar will move forward. Items from the policy committees, item number 4A, proposal to create council aide positions. Councilmember Gardner.
Thank you, Mayor. So this all was in the backup, but I do want to briefly talk through kind of the reasoning and how this looks. But I'm bringing forward an item to set aside approximately $377,000 out of the city budget to create a part-time aide position for each council member. This is really similar to the structure that the state legislature has. Legislators have aides, part-time aides that are paid, and this is very similar to that and somewhat reflective of the part-time nature of our jobs. Under this proposal, each council member would have up to $35,000 to budget. So 35,000 times 10 is obviously 350,000. The additional amount, as outlined in the backup, is for FICA and Medicare. That would work out to approximately $22.50 per hour for approximately 30 hours per week for approximately 52 weeks per year. These employees, these aides would be classified as variable hour non-benefit employees, meaning that they would not be eligible for career service protections, nor would they be eligible for benefits. I did include in there a sample job description. This kind of came together both from what the city of Denver uses for informational purposes. While being full-time, council members in Denver do have 3 full-time aides working for them. I also worked with our HR department with Ryan Lance to come up with this job description. And again, this is a sample. Each council member would, it might look a little bit differently, but I think this kind of captures, what I envision, and I think what several of my colleagues envision from talking to them. Of course, this position would be non-political, meaning that the aide would not be able to work on any political or election-related work. It would purely be an aide for city council business. So that's kind of a brief description. And like I said, this is all in your backup, but open for questions.
Oh, I have one, Councilwoman Gardner. When you refer to not being involved politically, you're just referring to their time doing their job, whether while they're doing their job, they're not supposed to be doing campaign activity, or are you trying to regulate their off-hours activity?
No, when they're being paid by the city, they would not be able to participate in campaign-related business.
Fully understood.
Mayor?
Mayor Pro Tem.
And I do want to, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say the one piece that I did forget, this budget would be up to a certain amount. So if a council member had less work or didn't have a need at all for that week, that would be at the prerogative of the council member. So the up to 30 hours, up to $35,000 per year would be the amount. However, some council members might have a need for less, significantly less, or none at all. So of course that would be at their prerogative.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, thank you. And I really object to the proposal. I respect that you brought this forward and feel the need for it. Personally, I think we were elected for the position of city council to be the face and to be the voice for those that voted for us. And I feel like this is basically outsourcing our job to someone else. And we're going to turn around, spend taxpayer monies to have someone else do our job without the voters being able to have input on this. If we were going to do this, I think it'd be better to go to the voters and ask their opinion. We also have 3 assistants in our office right now, 3 admin positions. And so we're obviously not talking about getting rid of the 3 administrative assistants, I don't think. So we would be having 3 administrative assistants, plus potentially everybody could have a personal assistant. And I honestly don't think that everyone is utilizing the 3 admins to the maximum potential that you could be, because even on the job description, it talks about answering calls and emails, liaison between council member and constituents. I do all that myself, but I guess, you could have the admin probably take some of those calls, manage the calendar. I manage my own calendar. I think we have attorneys that help us do research. So I have proposed ordinances and resolutions in the past, and I always go through the attorney's office. I typically do a little bit of research myself, and then I turn it over, and they continue to do more to draft the ordinance or the resolution. We also have neighborhood liaisons, and I know we have new council members, but those neighborhood liaisons I don't think are used to their potential as well. I use our neighborhood liaison, Scott Campbell. He attends my town hall meetings, and during the virtual town halls, he would help me to make sure that I was running that appropriately. But you know, I even have not used probably what I could in terms of reaching out to the neighborhood liaison to help me on some certain issues. So I know you said it's not a political position, but I find that that's going to be hard to monitor. You know, unless you know what they're doing every minute of the day. I think we're inviting some cronyism and possibly some political situations, which, you know, like I said, the voters elected us. They did not elect assistants, personal assistants. So I'm very much opposed to this.
Further discussion. I'm sorry.
That was Councilmember McConnell.
Councilmember McConnell.
Yeah, thank you, sir. And thank you, Councilmember Gardner, for putting this proposal together. So I guess I'll just say from my perspective, I actually see a lot of potential value in creating these positions. Not all of us have the privilege to dedicate all or at least most of our time to council. It is, as was mentioned, a part-time role, at least in terms of salary. I think most of my colleagues would probably agree that it is much closer to full-time, if not overtime, in reality, especially when you're looking at, 2,000-page council backup, when you're looking at, attending all or at least more policy committees than the 3 that we typically attend, when you look at all of our quasi-governmental and intergovernmental boards that we sit on, and more. So I think that there's a lot of benefits of this, especially as we continue to grow as a city. Our wards are going to get larger. The city is going to get larger in population overall. And I think this kind of sets the foundation for what a properly staffed legislative branch for what will eventually be the 2nd largest city in Colorado should look like. So I'm supportive of this moving forward. I do wish the positions were a little better paid and had a little more time. I understand the fiscal constraints that we're working with. And, I guess kind of to piggyback on a comment that Councilmember Bergen made, it sounds to me that part of the issue is that we're still operating under the assumption that Aurora is, as our charter, I think when it was drafted, it was like 1961. We were like around, 60, 70,000 in population. We're a much bigger city today. And I would actually like to see eventually these positions become full-time and maybe even a city and county of Aurora. But for the time being, with what we currently have, with the charter that we have, with the council that we have, I think this is a good step forward. So it has my support.
Mayor?
I'm sorry, Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, I just, first of all, the pay, just if you do the math on it, if they were working the 30 hours, they probably would be making a little bit more than we do currently as council members. Because I think if it was full-time, 40 hours, it'd be around 46,000 a year. So they would probably make more than we do. We ran as city council members knowing we should have known what this job was going to be about. We knew that we would sit on policy committees. We knew we would sit on outside boards. Most of us do sit on outside boards. And we knew that we would have to answer constituent, phone calls, emails, attend meetings. So I think, yes, we're a growing city, but we knew what the population was when we ran for city council. I think most of us, when we were campaigning, had to have that number in mind to get votes. So I agree that if we're going to continue on this course, that maybe we need to be a full-time council. I was opposed to that in the past, but I'm maybe going to be a little bit more open-minded. But I don't think we need to have personal assistants when we have 3 administrative assistants in our office that are not completely utilized. I would like, and I don't know, Councilmember Gardner, if you would be, open to this, but I personally would like us to kind of put a pause, do a 90-day assessment that would help us to define what our admins currently do, what we want them to do. Are they capable of doing that? Are we lacking resources? I think that would give us a really good idea to do the 90-day assessment and then come back and make a decision whether we should move forward.
Mayor.
Councilmember Gardner.
Yeah, so several things. First of all, I think it's disingenuous to say that these are personal assistants. I think In fact, this role, similar to legislative aid, I know I was a legislative aide at one point. I believe some of my colleagues were legislative aides at one point. My job was not a personal assistant. It was policy research. It was constituent outreach. There was a number of duties that I had where I was not a personal assistant. I provided value, and I think, as Councilmember Marcano observed, a city the size of Aurora, having even a part-time aide is commensurate with the complexity of our job. And as I talked about, the city of Denver, where they are full-time. Now, I agree that we're part-time paid and probably full-time hours, at least I spend full-time hours. They have 3 council aides. And so, I think this position would allow us to be a lot more efficient and also accomplish a lot more tasks for our constituents, because we are also stretched thin. That there are often times, and I know this because I hear from constituents, that they don't get satisfactory responses to items because we are currently stretched so thin. As far as, our current administrative staff, I envision this position differently. I'm not interested, for what I'm envisioning this and what's described in the job description, having shared staff. I think there are confidentiality and privacy concerns with that. I, for one, don't have a shared employee manage my calendar, respond to emails, those kinds of things. And this is not a reflection of our current staff at all, our current admin staff, who I think are great. But there have been times in the past where information that was shared with administrative staff was given to other council members. There have been times where ordinances or resolutions that are still in draft form have been shared with other council members. And I think in order to address specifically that piece of it, it's important for each council member to have an aide that they're comfortable working with that can help them do a better job.
Okay, let me do this. Let me first ask, because Mayor Pro Tem has basically a 90-day study by staff to determine whether or not the existing 3 FTEs could be utilized in a better manner to reflect the objectives that Councilmember Gardner is seeking through his proposal. Let me get a sense of the council on that, and then if that fails, I'll get a sense of the council on simply going forward with this and moving it forward to the floor. And so, is there objection to Mayor Pro Tem's proposal to do a 90-day study?
I object.
Councilmember Gardner objects. I'm sorry. Murillo objects.
Coombs.
Coombs objects.
Marcano.
Marcano objects.
Medina.
Medina objects.
Just for the record, Mayor, if I can say something.
Please proceed. Councilmember Sundberg.
In the great honor to serve as Ward 2 representative and serve on City Council, I have come to the realization this is one heck of a lot of work, more than I envisioned. Some work is left undone. It's challenging, but I also recognize the role of efficient city government. So I'm sort of torn here on this issue. I could certainly use more help and properly delegate things out, but I could use probably just a little more time to weigh this.
Okay.
Mayor,
Councilmember Zvonek.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Councilmember Sundberg said, because I do actually see the potential value in this role, and I've had some conversations with Councilmember Gardner about it. It is a little bit different than the legislative aid in this way, that there are resources in the Capitol that you don't have access to in the executive branch in the various departments, whereas what I'm learning is that we do have access to, say, Trevor Vaughn, tax and licensing, or Jason Batchelor. We have some other resources, and I think while I see the potential of it, and I'm not opposed to the concept, I do think the idea, especially for me, and I think this is where Councilmember Sundberg's coming from, the idea of us getting more time under our belt to really see if there are things that we are feeling overwhelmed with is in part because, well, we're new. And we're just, we haven't had the chance to really understand all of the resources that are currently available through us through the city manager system. And so I'm not a hard no forever, but I think for now I'd like to see the pause.
Okay.
Mayor.
I'm sorry, is that Councilmember Murillo?
Yeah, and maybe Coombs. You know, I guess I don't know what we're going to find in 90 days that folks who have been here like don't already know. To me, that's not going to provide any new information. I'm supportive of the proposal. I too worked at the state legislature. I'm very familiar with the lots of work, in fact, that aides and interns and volunteers that do to make sure that we are responsive, nimble, all that good stuff. I think in terms of, you know, again, I think our staff are very nice. They, you know, they try their best. To offer some context, though, our current staff were hired after we had some turnover from some longstanding staff members who got absorbed, who just left the city and also got absorbed in other areas. So we lost a lot of knowledge, and I think lost the capacity to really support with some of the functions that we're saying they're able to support with. Like and it's not a reflection of their level of anything, you know, other than they're not necessarily subject matter experts in policy, right? Like that's not why they were hired. They were hired, you know, when there was a different need, and more clerical and administrative needs. And I have leaned on them for that as well. But when I have leaned on, you know, some of our staff for other needs, that's not their subject matter area of expertise. And I feel like we're setting them up for success, saying that that is indeed what their position is meant for. Because, you know, again, we've had so much turnover, not just in the staff, but their supervisor, right? So I don't think I'm going to learn anything new over a 90-day period. If anything, I would ask us to review what we already have, instead of, you know, a 90-day period. You know, why don't we review the data and what we already know about how these staff work and engage with council members instead?
Okay, I think that this only 5 members have arisen in opposition to the Bergen proposal of studying this for 90 days. And so unless there's anybody else that wants to rise in opposition, and we'll go back to the Gardner proposal. But if not, then this will move forward 90 days. Councilmember Coombs?
Yeah, so I just have a question. So if this passes, does that mean, so doing the 90-day study, does that mean that Councilmember Gardner's proposal can't go forward? That doesn't seem to me that has to be the case.
I think the Mayor's Pro Tem proposal. Mayor Pro Tem, please.
What I wanted to do is a 90-day assessment of what the needs are from the council members that don't feel that they need extra help for their job, as well as what we currently have in terms of resources that are available to us, maybe, you know, some unknown. So it's more an assessment of what the needs are, where the void is, what we currently have. And I think that is very helpful. We do assessments all the time, you know, evaluations before we spend taxpayer monies on other things. And I think it's fair. It's only fair that we do this assessment to have accurate information, accurate data. So I'm not saying stop Councilmember Gardner's proposal. I'm just asking for this 90-day assessment.
Is there anyone else who would rise in opposition to the Mayor Pro Tem's proposal for a 90-day study? Seeing none, then that's what we will move forward with a 90-day study, and then revisit this issue after the study. Item number 4B, diaper product sales tax exemption. Councilmember Gardner.
Thank you, Mayor. What you have in front of you is an ordinance to exempt the collection of sales tax for diapers in the city of Aurora. This is somewhat of a companion ordinance to an item I brought forward last year with Councilmember Hiltz at the time that exempted menstrual products from sales tax collection. For reference, that item was supported by council unanimously 10-0 to exempt menstrual products. Diapers are very similar in that they are medically necessary. However, we've heard stories of children who have shown up at school with plastic bags taped to them and other things like that. And while I understand on a purchase of diapers, one purchase of diapers, we're not talking about a significant amount of money. It can add up over time. And there are families in our community where top ramen is dinner for the night. And this might make a difference in that. I think this is a way for council to signal that we value families, working families. It's an opportunity to cut taxes for families in our city. And I did present this at the January meeting, I believe, of the Business Advisory Board. The Business Advisory Board, there was one member that voted against the proposal because he didn't think it was a sufficient enough savings, essentially. All other members of the Business Advisory Board did sponsor this. I do want to mention there's somewhat of a, not a campaign, but there's a bill moving through the state legislature that would that would prohibit the collection of sales tax on menstrual products and diapers statewide. That would obviously only apply to sales tax collection at the state level. And while we've done it for menstrual products, I think it's appropriate to cut taxes for families in our cities for diapers as well. There would be approximately a $500,000 impact to the budget for this. I do want to mention, because this did come up in the conversation on menstrual products, POS systems. We talked to some retailers as I was working through this. POS systems are already programmed to segregate out diapers, and so this would be a real easy change for the retailers in our city to make, to not collect sales tax on these items. So with that, available for questions.
Questions of the sponsor or discussion on 4B? Seeing none, is there any opposition? Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, I wanted to say, although I appreciate the sentiment behind lowering costs for people that are struggling with cost of diapers, it really doesn't help them. Cost of diapers is expensive, and the sales tax is, not really, is nominal. So I think I just don't think it's really going to solve the problem. And there are resources currently for those that are struggling to get diapers. I know through some of the nonprofits, they provide those. And then also SB 21027 passed in last year in the state legislation that gives $5 million towards a diaper distribution program. So that program right now is being handled through the Department of Human Services, and then we'll go next year, I believe, to third-party nonprofits. But there's $5 million already allocated to those who are eligible to get free diapers. So I think, there's a lot of ways to do it through nonprofits and helping individuals with the cost of it, rather than just a tax exemption for everyone out there. And lastly, I just think it's a slippery slope, because there's going to be other products, baby products, other, products that are going to end up coming before us also that, people want an exemption from. So I'm not in supportive of this. I'm more supportive of trying to find ways to help those that don't have the money for those products.
Further discussion.
Mayor.
Councilmember Gardner.
Yeah, I frankly don't find the argument that it's not enough of a tax cut to be a reason to vote against the tax cut. To me, it's a tax. Taxation is theft, and at the end of the day, I think we should look for all opportunities to cut taxes. And so, I certainly don't want to go tell a family that's eating top ramen for dinner tonight, well, sorry, you don't get to pay for that dinner because we had an opportunity to cut your taxes, but it just wasn't big enough. I'm certainly open to finding ways we can cut taxes on other products. I would love to have that conversation. We had a brief discussion on that at the last management and finance meeting. So I certainly would be open to finding additional products or other things where we can do the same thing. But I don't think that is an effective argument against basically voting to keep taxes instead of getting rid of them. I think we need to look for any ways we can to help the families in our city.
Mayor.
Further discussion.
Mayor Kerensky.
Oh, I'm sorry. Who's Councilmember Zirinsky?
So I personally have a child that's in diapers, and I buy a lot of diapers. I just think that I would rather work with you, Councilmember Gardner, and see how maybe we can just look for a tax decrease in its entirety for the city rather than going item by item. Maybe we should just look at across the board lowering the tax rate in this city. And I think that that's something that would be beneficial to the entire city, not just to either women that need feminine hygiene products or men or women who have children, that are diaper age. There's a lot of people that don't fit into that category. And I think there's a lot of people outside of those categories in our city struggling, maybe only can afford to eat top ramen. And I think that we should be looking at a tax increase or a tax decrease across the board. And I think from an equitable standpoint, I think that that's what we should be doing rather than just feminine hygiene products and diapers.
Further discussion.
Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. So we had just had a presentation not too long ago from APS where folks talked about, declining birth rates and, the potential to shutter schools and whatnot. And one of the big drivers behind that is just the cost of child rearing, raising a child. And that includes, materials and supplies. I'm not saying that, if we exempt diaper products from sales taxes, that'll solve the problem. Far from it. I'd actually, propose an alternative to what some of you all have mentioned, in regards to broad-based tax cuts. I'd rather see us raise wages so that people can actually afford the, the needs, the necessities of life so that they can actually survive, and not just survive, but hopefully thrive in our city. But that being said, I don't think there's the will on council to do that kind of stuff right now. So with this specific measure, I'm in support of it. We did remove taxes for feminine hygiene products last year. I think that was a no-brainer, and I think that this is moving in that right direction where we can allow people a slightly easier time to get the bare necessities of life while we, work on better systemic policy. So I support this.
Further discussion.
Mayor Zvonek.
Councilmember Zvonek.
Yeah. So again, I completely sympathize with this. As when I first had my first kid, I was in a much different financial position than I am today, and I understand that whether it's diapers or formula, these types of things are very expensive and were line items in my family's budget at the time. So I get it. But to Councilmember Drinsky's point about broad-based, I think if we're going to cut with $500,000 from the budget, there's other household items that impact families that don't just have kids between the ages of 0 and 2.5 or 3 or whenever they're out of diapers. I mean, there are families who are struggling just like the ones that you described that are having top ramen for dinner. They're struggling when their kids are 4, 5, and 6 and out of diapers, but they're still paying for household goods like toilet paper and lots of other things. And so I would much rather look for something when we cut taxes, which I would be completely for. It's either got to be broad-based, or if it's targeted, there's got to be some secondary economic benefit to it for all taxpayers. Otherwise, what we're doing is good politics, but not good policy. And I'm in favor of looking for something that's good policy, and I just don't think this is it.
Okay, further discussion, and then I'm going to get a sense of the council. Seeing none, who is in opposition to this item number 4B?
Bergen, Lawson,
Zvonek.
Arinsky,
Sundberg.
And the mayor. So it does not move forward. Item number 4C, repeal obsolete license provisions. Trevor Long.
All right. Thank you. This was presented at the Management and Finance Committee. It's a cleanup of a couple licensing provisions that are no longer enforced. When one is the mobile home park license, which has been not enforced for at least a couple of decades. I think it was mostly related to new mobile home parks. The other one is a retail seller's license, which basically went away with expansion of how the business license is used and changes in systems. So it's obsolete. The last one is the Christmas tree adjunct license, which was held by 6 businesses this past year, but in evaluation of that license, we didn't see a need for it any longer with the new approach by the fire department with regards to permitting and inspecting those operations. So we thought that this would be a good idea to bring forward to council for cleanup.
Discussion? Is there any objection to moving item 4C forward? I see no objection. Item number 4C will move forward. Item number 4D, audit report from the 2021 mayor and city council expense engagement. Mr. Summer.
Thank you, Mayor Kaufman. Council members, good evening. This audit was requested by the Management and Finance Committee, which also functions as the audit committee for the city. The particular report before you covers 10 months of expenses in 2021. Future reports will cover 12 months, and we will be reporting to the M&F committee on an exception basis quarterly. In this particular report, the objectives were to determine whether expenses were recorded and occurred in accordance with council policy, and also to determine whether the expenses were adequately supported by supporting documentation. Our audit conclusions are that mayor and council are effectively complying with their rules of order and procedure regarding their expenses, but we also did find some exceptions to the need for adequate support, and we've made recommendations accordingly. Our two recommendations are first, that a designated approving official should sign off on all applicable forms as evidence of a required review before they're submitted for payment or reimbursement. And second, that adequately detailed and itemized support for expenditures should be included for all meal expenses. Any deviations from the policy should be documented and approved. If council accepts these two recommendations, we will work with the issue owners to discuss how to implement those recommendations for the future.
Thank you. Questions to staff?
Mayor.
Councilman Gardner.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I want to say thank you to Wayne and his group for performing this. Just a little context for the rest of council. So as chair of the Management and Finance Committee last year, 2021, it came to our attention very early on in the year that mayor and council expenses had not been audited in several years. And it appears that that was at the direction of a former city manager. And, obviously from a taxpayer accountability and transparency perspective, that was very concerning. And so, after the audit plan for 2021 had been finalized, I had asked Wayne and his group to look into these expenses. And so just want to say thank you to Wayne for doing that and his staff. I think it's really important that, even though we're elected officials, what we spend taxpayer dollars on is important. And so when I had heard that they hadn't been audited, that was obviously very concerning. So thanks, Wayne, for your work on this. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Further discussion?
Mayor, Councilmember Lawson.
Councilmember Lawson.
So, Mr. Summer, I have a question. So just a little clarification, as I was reading through this on page 235, you have two charts here. So below is the breakdown of expenses by council member from our expense population. And then I'm just trying to understand the correlation with the second chart. So I'm just using me, for example. I had 8 transactions in the first chart, and then in the second chart, I had 4 transactions. So can you explain those correlations? Because I'm trying to understand those two charts.
Absolutely, and we'll stick with your example. You had 8 transactions that were recorded in the financial records of the city. We looked at 4 of those. So what we did was we sampled the expenditures that were in the general ledger. And of the 220 total expenditures or transactions, we looked at 130 of those. That's how those two charts connect.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. I was just trying to understand that. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Further discussion?
Question?
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, so on the first chart where you have number of transactions for each of us with the amounts, so some of them are close to 5,000, other council members are in the 2,000s, and some are in the 1,000s in terms of their expenses. These are for what expenses typically?
Typically travel expenses and meal expenses.
And meal expenses, so are those meal expenses only related to conferences?
Not all.
Okay, so the others are council members. I guess I don't, because I've only used meals when I'm on a conference. And then my only other expense is on town halls where I have, lemonade and cookies for my constituents. So the other meals are not, can be non-conference?
In accordance with your policy and rules, yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Further discussion? Seeing none, is there any question? Is there any opposition to move forward with item number 4D? Seeing none, item number 4D will move forward. Thank you very much for the presentation. Item number 4E, Westfield Stanley Apartments Reimbursement Agreement.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Sarah Young, Aurora Water. This is a reimbursement agreement in Northwest Aurora, close to Stanley Marketplace. As a reminder, reimbursement agreements are entered into when a developer is asked to build infrastructure larger than is what was required for their site. In this case, it was a large stormwater pipe that's helping decrease flooding potential in Northwest Aurora. The reimbursement amount is for $442,000. The unique part about this reimbursement agreement is the study results that led to needing this pipe were late in the development process. And so in lieu of us doing a long-term reimbursement agreement, we're actually reimbursing those costs as the project progresses. Everyone agreed it was best for us to dig up these roads at 22nd and 23rd to install these pipes ahead of the development going in. And we were able to reprioritize our stormwater program in order to pay this in this year and next year. So this is a reimbursement agreement again with Stanley Apartments.
Any questions of staff? Seeing none, is there any objection to moving item number 4E forward? Seeing no objection, item number 4E will move forward. Thank you, Sarah. Item number 4F, intergovernmental cost sharing agreement to fund interlocal funding agreement for Colorado River Conservation resolution. Alexandra Davis.
Yes, good evening, Mayor and council members. This agreement is really about supporting positive progress in the lower basin of the Colorado River. So as you know, the Colorado River Basin is experiencing an enormous historic drought. They have been experiencing drought for 22 years now. And one of the largest users of water in the Colorado River Basin is agricultural land. So Aurora leads the way in conservation and in terms of decreasing demand, and many cities, particularly in the West, work very hard to decrease their demand and work conservation. Agriculture is a place where the ability to increase use and decrease demand is a huge opportunity. And this is a contribution to a pilot project in the lower basin where we are working with Denver and Colorado Springs and Pueblo Board of Waterworks to support a pilot system that would presumably translate into water savings in the lower basin, which would support water savings in the upper basin. The entire amount, I'm sorry. I was just gonna say our cost share will be $7,500.
Questions of staff? Seeing none, is there any opposition to moving item number 4F forward? Seeing none, item number 4F will move forward. Thank you, Alexandra. Item number 4G, the Board of Waterworks of Pueblo water lease with Aurora Water, Pueblo lease agreement resolution. Alexandra Davis.
Yes, good evening again. This lease agreement is a renewal of an existing lease. This lease will allow us to continue to access 5,000 acre feet of pristine mountain water. The new lease includes some additional flexibility with regards to how much water we take in a particular year, but it does provide water high up in Aurora's mountain system. And the cost of the lease is increased. We do think that it is an important opportunity to continue to lease this water from Pueblo Board of Waterworks because of the value of this water. And it does provide approximately 10 to 11% of our water water from the Upper Arkansas and Colorado River basins.
Questions of staff? Seeing none, is there any objection to moving item number 4G forward? Seeing none, item number 4G will move forward. Thank you, Alexandra.
Thank you.
Item number 4H, state legislative update. Councilmember Lawson.
Thank you, Mayor. Included in your backup is, for tonight's study session, is the state legislative update. Instead of going through each of these bills, I wanted to ask if council members have any bills they would like to pull for discussion, and we have our staff here to discuss those positions that were taken at the Pfizer committee.
Councilmember Lawson, the legislation that was brought forward by the Colorado Retail Council on retail theft. I wonder if somebody could speak to that.
Okay.
Mayor, this is Roberto. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, we have circulated that bill and have not taken a position, but we have it on the agenda for the Pfizer committee for the March 11th meeting.
Okay, I would strongly urge the Pfizer committee to take a proactive position on this legislation. I think it's extremely important. I think that this pertains to organized retail theft, and I think it is a real problem. And I think that the legislation is trying to help mitigate that problem. Further questions or comments?
Mayor?
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes, could we get a brief presentation on the reduced justice involvement for young children?
Is Judge Day here?
I can speak to it if not. The bill changes the minimum age of juvenile justice who is subject to the juvenile court's jurisdiction from, I believe, 10 to 14. So Judge Day is on the call, so he can speak to that bill as he provided the staff recommendation.
Yes, good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, members of council. This is House Bill 1131. On February 16th, the House Judiciary Committee had a very long hearing where testimony was taken both in support and opposition of the bill. Chairman Weitzman held the bill over because there were multiple amendments that were going to be added or proposed for the bill. It's actually set for a hearing tomorrow in front of the House Judiciary. I have not, nor do I know anybody who has seen the proposed amendments for the bill. The bill itself increases the age of what is basically criminal culpability from 10 to 13. So anybody that's aged 10, 11, and 12 would not be subject to being charged for any criminal activity, except for the current version of the bill, homicide. Now, again, because of a lot of testimony that was taken at the February 16th hearing, I anticipate that there will be a lot of amendments that will add to the exceptions instead of just homicide. There was a lot of testimony relating to sexual assault charges. And I know one proposed amendment, again, which I have not seen yet, that will deal with crimes of violence as well.
Okay, and that was my concern, was crimes of violence, and also obviously, rape, any of the sexual violence crimes. So I appreciate that you guys took a position of oppose on it.
Further questions, comments?
Mayor?
Councilmember Combs.
I'd like to look at HB 1138, the reduce employer single occupancy vehicle trips. I just have some information from our discussion at Dr. Cog. Can I proceed? Oh, sorry, Councilmember Lawson, do you?
And I just was looking at that today, and I mean, Councilmember Coombs, please proceed with that. I know that it seems like it was postponed indefinitely from a 9 to 1 on 228, the bill, when I looked it up today.
Okay, so that was probably after our discussion at Dr. Cog. There were just we had taken a position of monitor because there were questions about some of the things that were present, but from what I saw in the backup, some of the things that were stated as required were presented to us at DRCOG as being incentivized rather than required. So I did want to clarify that, but if it's not moving forward, then we'll go ahead and not worry about it.
Further discussion?
Mayor.
Councilmember Marcano.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to know a little more about the turf replacement program and how that intersects with some of what Aurora Water has going on in terms of incentivizing folks to swap out turf for more sustainable lawns.
Joshua Godwin is on the line. Joshua, can you speak to that bill? He's in Aurora Water.
Yes, Joshua Godwin. I'm with Aurora Water. I'm also the acting intergovernmental relations service manager. So this kind of is very much in line with what Aurora Water is already doing, and we're supportive of the concept to replace turf. It's aimed obviously at reducing water consumption. Our one question with the bill is where the funding is coming from, or is it going to be taken from other projects or initiatives? I know that Marshall Brown, Alex Davis, and Sarah Young are also on the call if they want to add to that.
Okay. Further comments or questions? Seeing none.
Mayor,
Is there,
sorry.
Councilmember Combs.
So the other bill that I would want to look at is the prompt bond hearing. So that's 1067. So what I'm wondering is, was there any analysis about how this would impact court dockets, like on a Monday where we have to get people out within 72 hours from our jail, right? And so if someone came in on Friday, then it seems like Monday we would be pretty overburdened. Do we have a significant need to engage our relief judges in those circumstances for those Mondays to get folks out within 72 hours? So it seems like in general, the conversation is about how hard it would be to and how costly it would be to get people their bond hearings within 48 hours. But I wonder how it might also alleviate some existing issues that we currently have, given that our jail can only hold folks for 72 hours.
Mayor, if I can, I'll respond. Thank you. Councilmember Coombs, thank you for the question. The bill 1067 would mandate that we conduct a bond hearing within 48 hours after receiving notice that the person was brought into our detention center, or that they were arrested on a warrant in any other county jail. We would have to conduct the bond hearing within 48 hours. So clearly it would have an impact as to the hearings that we would need to do during either a Saturday or a Sunday session. That means we would bring in staff to conduct the hearing, and that's full staff, not only within the judicial department, prosecutor's office, public defender's office, court administration, detention, if it involved somebody at our detention center. How would that impact the Monday hearings? Clearly, if we hold those hearings during the weekend, it would lessen the amount of hearings that we would be doing on Mondays, that 72-hour period. So it would have that actual benefit. But at the same time, it requires us to conduct those hearings on days where we're not required to conduct those hearings now. Right now, the status of the law for municipal courts is that we have to do it within 2 calendar days, except for Sundays and holidays. So it has that impact by requiring the hearings, and we would have to do weekend court. The bill itself does not provide funding for cities, municipalities to conduct those hearings. And that was one of the concerns that we've had all along with this bill, although there are discussions, stakeholding that we've been doing on the funding part of it. I hope that there will be a bill introduced later in session that will piggyback on current bond that we already utilize for the public defender in seeing people who are in custody. There's some possibility that that could happen. We've also done some stakeholding as to some language that would require the county sheriffs to make sure that people are actually brought before the court within that 48-hour period. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, that answered my first question, although it does raise another question to some of the comments that you made. If we are actively engaging on amendments and stakeholding, then I guess my question is why we would not instead take an amend position rather than an active opposed position if we are actually advocating for amendments.
If I may respond, Mayor, we've taken the position as to oppose unless amended for quite some time, and we've done a lot of different stakeholding, several meetings, trying to get some consideration as it relates to the funding part of it, because right now it is a mandate and there's no money behind that mandate. And so that's been a strong part of our opposition going forward. And there hasn't been any movement within the bill. And that's when I say within this bill, within pushing 1067 forward regarding funding. Has there been other discussions and possibility of funding being added to another bill that has yet to have been brought before the General Assembly? That could happen, but it hasn't happened yet. So we have taken the position of oppose unless amended. There has been some positive amendments regarding the concern that we had about the county sheriff not getting the people before the court within that 48-hour period. And I think that part of any opposition that we have has been addressed within the amendment.
Further questions or concerns?
Mayor Zvonik.
Councilmember Zvonik.
Yeah, this question, Councilmember Lawson, and maybe this just isn't a part of our normal process, so forgive me, but I know that there is a bill that's been discussed that deals with mandating collective bargaining on local governments, and there is no actual legislation at this point. It's just a conversation that's been ongoing. CML, the counties, rural schools have all come out against it, as it would just be hugely detrimental to local governments. Thankfully, the governor has indicated that he is not in support, and I think that's what's holding it up. But is there any reason why we don't or couldn't take a proactive opposition to something that would be detrimental to our city before it actually, turns into bill mode and something that we would monitor?
I mean, we can do that if you want to actually do that. I know that I think on this particular issue, like you said, CML, they have taken opposed position as well. But if we want to try to do an official letter, I guess we can, Roberto. I mean, we've opposed the legislation, so.
Mayor, if I could.
Please.
Is there a process by which we would bring that forward, whether through a resolution on council or what would be the appropriate venue for us to do that if we wanted to?
I mean, I think we should do it in a letter format.
Okay.
If it's okay, we can take that to Pfizer. Usually the process is go through Pfizer. We can provide a draft letter. Pfizer would take a position, provide it to the council to get an official position. We typically not take positions on bills until they're introduced per the council rule for Pfizer, but in this circumstance, we will take it as a letter of support. We've done that in the past on other issues, but I would recommend we go to Pfizer, regular process, and then to council for the approval for 6 for a majority.
Okay. Further discussion?
Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. Just for clarification on that last point, I understand that bill has not moved forward yet, but my understanding was that it gave municipalities and other jurisdictions the option rather than mandated them to allow employees to unionize. Isn't that correct?
It's a mandate.
Mayor.
Councilmember Zvonik.
Local jurisdictions already have the option to do it, but because voters continue to reject it, they're looking at ways to just mandate it.
Further discussion? Okay, seeing none.
Mayor, sorry.
Councilmember Combs.
I would just like to register now that I oppose any effort to prevent employees from having the right to collectively bargain. And so I definitely will also oppose when that letter comes to us.
Very well. Further discussion? Seeing none, and I also obviously want Pfizer to consider the organized retail theft And with that, we will then move on. Thank you, Councilmember Lawson. The time is now 8:14. We will take a 6-minute break until 8:20. Council is now in recess. Council is back in session. 6A, consideration of a proposal to amend B subparent 2 and D subparent 3 of the City Council Rules of Order and Procedure regarding council sponsors. Councilmember Zvonek.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to start off by kind of outlining what it is that I'm trying to solve for in this change. And we had a conversation about it at the Rules Committee. And I've actually, I'm going to subsequently go into maybe a alternative recommendation that'll address this. But first, let me tee it up. So when you think about the Venn diagram of all the responsibilities that we have, on one side you have policy-related issues that are clearly in the wheelhouse and responsibility of council. On the other side, you have the responsibilities that are clearly in the purview of city management. And in the middle, you have a big gray area where policy and management intersect. I'm not trying to solve for that, and there's a lot there. What I'm trying to solve for are the issues that are clearly in that first bucket, that are in the purview, policy issues in the purview of council, but that are brought forward by staff. And in this original proposal that was in the backup and that we discussed at the Rules Committee was that the policy committee chair would have the opportunity to look at those resolutions and ordinances that were brought forward by staff and determine whether or not they actually needed a council sponsor because they were in fact policy-oriented issues. Since then, since our Rules Committee meeting, I've had a lot of feedback from my colleagues even during that and had a chance to think through it. And I think a less cumbersome way to approach it and to potentially still address that issue would be to allow for any member of council, whether it's at a policy meeting or at a study session, when there is a staff-initiated ordinance or resolution that is, again, clearly in that bucket of policy making, that they would require staff to come forward or to find a council sponsor. And in order to ensure that it's not abused, and we would have a situation where if the majority of council disagreed with that individual member, they could overrule them and we could move forward. In the 90 days I've been on council, there's been hundreds of agenda items between regular council meetings and study session. And to be honest, there's only 2 instances that I could point to, but they're still clearly in the purview of council, I believe both of them, that I would have said, hey, I believe these need a council sponsor. And so my hope is that we will consider basically a strike below amendment to this, where instead of having the policy committee chairs determining this, that any member of council at the policy committee or at study session, if they saw an ordinance that they believed was not clearly management related, but in fact policy setting, that they could require that ordinance resolution have at least A, and it could be all of us, right? There could be an issue that we all think is really great and we're all willing to put our names on, or multiple, but it have to have at least one member of our elected representatives carrying that policy proposal.
Let me ask one question, and that is that wouldn't that have to occur at the policy committee level? You just mentioned a study session, but then it would move forward without a sponsor from policy committee to study session. I would think it would be at the policy committee level.
The policy committee level would be preference, but the only reason I'd say either or is this, is that let's say, for instance, there was an issue that was brought to management and finance, and none of the three members there said, hey, I think this needs to have it. But then it gets to a study session and the mayor pro tem, who doesn't sit on a policy committee, or you decide, hey, you know what, I think this does in fact need one. And again, to ensure that it's not abused, the majority of council could say, no, we disagree. But if the majority doesn't, then that would require, but hopefully it would be done at the policy committee level, but just in those instances where something did get through and nobody called it out, because it wouldn't be the responsibility of the policy committee or the chairs to identify them. But if they did, or any one of them had a problem with it, they could call it out.
Okay, further discussion.
Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. Just as I said, kind of in our Rules Committee meeting where this was first brought up, I think this is a solution in search of a problem. This is going to honestly, I think, add unnecessary bureaucracy to the legislative process here. And it's entirely subjective. What one person considers controversial, the rest of us might not. I think that we go on the record supporting or opposing a measure, whether it's brought by a council member or staff, by how we actually end up voting in an open meeting. I think that's enough. I just don't really see what the purpose of this is. And I think, again, it just unnecessarily complicates things.
Further discussion.
Mayor?
Mayor Protem.
So just to clarify, because originally it was going to have to go through a policy committee chair. So this Councilmember Zvonek, you feel would be used rarely, and it would still require, even if a council member said, I think it needs a sponsor, a council sponsor, it still would require a majority vote
Mayor, if I
from
could.
the council?
Please proceed.
Yeah, so it would the majority vote would only happen if they disagreed. So if an issue came forward to study session and you said, I think this needs it, if the majority of council said, no, we don't agree that needs one, then it would. Otherwise, it would have to have one. And, you know, to Councilmember Marcano's point, this isn't about controversial issues. I actually could see things that have broad support doing it. It's just that we try, in a city manager form of government, we try really hard to not get into the management side of things. And we should try equally as hard to make sure that we are solely responsible for the policy issues. And I do, like I said, I understand that there is that big gray area where policy and management intersect. And I don't think that trying to address that could be done this way, and it would become overly bureaucratic. Like I said, in the 200-ish or 300-ish plus agenda items we've had in my short time on council, I can only think of two that I would have pointed out that were clearly policy related issues. These were not management issues that were brought forward by staff, that I would have wanted one of our elected officials who are charged with setting policy for the city to bring them forward. This isn't to say that staff shouldn't bring forward ideas. I actually think they should. In fact, tonight, Trevor Vaughn brought forward some very good ideas from tax and licensing reform, and I want that to continue to happen. I just think that if it's a policy setting thing, that one of us should be willing to put our names on it. And again, it might be all of us. It might be something that we all think is a good idea. And I don't think it will be overly, this is why I changed the idea from having the council or the policy committee chair to just having anybody. It's, if you see something that you think, hey, this really falls into that bucket of policy setting, call it out. And if the majority of us disagree, then it moves forward anyway. But it gives us that chance to have that conversation about making sure that those things that are truly in our responsibility as policy setters isn't being pushed over to the staff. And same thing, they should call us out when we move into the management side of things, and they do.
Further discussion.
Mayor.
Councilmember Moreno.
Thank you. I think it's ironic we're talking about adding another layer of bureaucracy when we just standed up an ad hoc red tape committee to remove such unnecessary steps. I agree. I don't think this is not necessary, especially if in the example given, only 2 instances have potentially warranted. That doesn't, to me, warrant a whole policy, even though I don't agree with the premise of it. And then I guess the proposed change that council members would have to sponsor that is like taking credit for somebody else's work. Like a council member would have done nothing to put their name as a sponsor, and then come, re-election time, we can claim, oh, I was a sponsor of this ordinance, yet we did nothing except go through this unnecessary step to claim that, to claim ourselves as a sponsor. I think it's unnecessary at this time, and that makes me uncomfortable to know that'd be a potential, because that's what happens. It makes me uncomfortable to know that we could just add our name onto something that we didn't really do any work for.
I rise in support of the Zvonek proposal because we have an outdated form of government that was really meant for a city of a much smaller size, where the most controversial issues would be planning and zoning issues, but we are, the 51st largest city in the United States, and really, I think, struggles to meet the challenges of an urban, a large city of race, poverty, and crime, and so the resulting impact has been that you have unelected bureaucrats really making policy for the city. That's the province of the city council. And so I rise in support and hope that this curbs that practice. Further discussion. Seeing none, is there opposition to the Zvonek proposal number 6A?
Marcano.
Murillo.
Combs.
Further opposition? Seeing none, the Savonic proposal, item number 6A, will move forward. Item number 6B, discussion and consideration of options for changes to the public to be heard on non-agenda items, portions of city council meetings. Is this I have Dan Brossman down, but is this council member Savonic? Is this your proposal?
No, this came out, this is a, these are, I think, a couple of different options that came out of the Rules Committee. I think there's 3 of them here. But
so, Dan Brossman, City Attorney.
And Councilmember Zvonic's absolutely correct. 3 options were identified for public invited to be heard. The first one is simply no change, leave the agenda simply as it is. The next is an hour time limit for public to be invited to be heard. So that would be a standing limitation, similar to, well, I think Denver's is half an hour, but theirs is a standing limitation. The other option is an hour limitation when necessary. So that would be conveyed from the city clerk to the mayor that there are a large number of speakers, and then council would then determine at that particular meeting whether a time limit should be imposed or not. And that one also includes the elimination of the second public invited to be heard on the agenda.
Okay. Yeah, Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah. Dan, I think on that other option, so the 1 hour standing, and then the other option of 1 hour, my understanding was it would be 1 hour unless the majority of council, based on information from the clerk, would extend it. And maybe I'm wrong, if other Rules Committee members remember. Savonic.
yeah, Mayor.
Councilmember Savonic.
Yeah, there was one option that was just an hour. We were going to set a opportunity for 1 hour period before, and then the other 2. But there was one that was just an hour prior to.
To Dan, item option B and C would then eliminate the last public invited to be heard. Am I correct? Of the night. Okay.
That is correct.
Okay, the second one. Okay. Further discussion?
Mayor?
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, I mean, this is hard because we, we have heard from some constituents via email, and I understand we want to hear from the public. We don't want to, limit their ability to address us, but we, as everyone has said, how much the city has grown. We have large, long agenda meetings with a lot of different items on them. One of them was, I think, over 2,000 pages. And we have outside speakers that speak as well as staff do, presentations. And when we have the very long public invited, we're delaying the outside speakers. We're delaying our staff members. I think this was a compromise because I think it was brought up in rules to do the 30 minutes like Denver, but then we thought that was too short and found that the 1 hour seemed to be an appropriate time for just non-agenda items. And the just to be clear to the public, any agenda item still is unlimited. So if you're there to speak on any agenda item, a public hearing, development, whatever, you would have unlimited time.
Okay. Does anybody wish to move item A, B, or C forward?
Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. I'd prefer to move option 3 forward. No change. I mean, just because Denver and other jurisdictions have lower standards doesn't mean that we should lower ours. I think
Option number 8.
Said earlier that we knew what we were getting into when we ran for office. Public invited to be heard has been this way since as long as I can remember. One of my constituents is to be believed. It's been this way for at least 44 years. So I don't believe that we should be limiting the public's ability to speak to us. I think that things that are not on the agenda are just as important as the ones that we're going to be discussing on an agenda. And in fact, that's how a lot of items have been brought to council's attention in the past. So, yeah, I'd move option 3 forward. No change.
Is that option A or option 3?
It's 3 is the way it was in our backup, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, very well.
In the backup, that's option 3, Mayor.
Okay, very well. Is there opposition to moving item 3 forward?
Zavonic.
Ansky.
I'm sorry. Who? I'm sorry. I have Savonic and Jurinsky.
And Bergen.
Okay. Is there further opposition? Mayor is in opposition. Seeing only 5 that have arisen, item number 3 will move forward.
Mayor, that's actually a no change option, so we won't be bringing anything forward.
That's correct. There are no call-ups, no miscellaneous items, no items removed from the agenda.
Oh, Mayor?
Mayor Pro Tem.
Sorry, are we doing 6C on quorum?
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, my own. Sorry. Item number 60, consideration of a resolution to amend the rules of order and procedure of the City Council regarding decorum during debate. So what this refers to, and this would be consistent with the state legislature and with the U.S. House of Representatives, and that is that you, when you're in opposition to a policy brought forward by a member, you don't attack the member, you attack the policy. And so what I'm advocating is that it be consistent with that. And that would be applicable not to any outside comments, but it would be applicable in all formal proceedings to include policy committees meetings, to include study sessions, to include the regular meetings of the City Council and the winter workshops. So that is the proposal. Further discussion?
Mayor.
Councilmember Combs.
So I just want to clarify what constitutes a personal attack versus a conversation about the policy itself, A, and B, whether or not our communications and honesty in our communications to the public about policy are considered part of that policy itself, because I don't think definitionally that it constitutes a personal attack to say that a message that has gone out to the public is inaccurate. So can we just get some clarification on the definition of personal attack and how personal attack will be determined if there is a controversy from the city attorney's office? How is it defined, and what would happen if there was a controversy regarding whether something constitutes an attack?
So if I said that you were a liar, if I if I say in a Facebook post, that's different. But I say during the proceeding that you're a liar, you know, and my focus is on you as an individual. I say you're a liar. I say you're doing it because of a donor. You don't believe in this policy, as opposed to discuss the policy itself. Then in saying that I disagree with this policy because of X, Y, and Z, that would be consistent. But I disagree with the policy because the sponsor is an X, Y, and Z. That would not be appropriate, and that would not fall in in the rules. Again, these are consistent with other legislative bodies.
And so this allows you to continue to take to Twitter and call your colleagues dumb and dumber, but it wouldn't, for example, enable your colleagues to say that we're concerned that the public has been misled about a policy due to communications that have happened outside the meeting. We couldn't say that, but you can keep calling people dumb and dumber. Am I to be clear that that's what's happening here?
You can certainly say the policy is dumb and dumber as was done in that particular message, but I think that this really speaks to itself. I don't think this is a complicated stuff. Mayor Pro Tem.
But I did ask for some clarification and definition from the city attorney's office. What is the definition of an attack, and what would happen if there was a controversy? Those were my two questions.
Okay, and I just want to say something, because right now this illustrates why we need this this conduct decorum to go forward, because right now you're doing exactly that. You're disparaging the mayor, and that's not respectful. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. And so, you know, it's just clearly illustrated right now.
Yeah, let me defer to the mayor and let me say first that these are the lowest possible standards that I've seen in my 3 decades of service in the American government. I mean, it's really, just incredible what goes on here, and it just needs to stop. And this says we ought to have standards, and we don't have any standards right now. Let me defer to the city attorney.
And so, under debate, under parliamentary procedures E2, the actual decision is made either if it's a council meeting or study session, it's made by the mayor. If it's a committee meeting, it's made by the chair. On whether it's an attack or whether it's an issue, that is then the responsibility of the chair or the mayor to move that forward. So right now, it's a determination that it's rather straightforward, but if you'd like a further definition put in as to what constitutes a attack of a personal nature, we can add something. We can simply take from the state and take from the federal government on their standards.
Yeah, not hard to figure out.
Mayor.
Further discussion.
Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, City Attorney Brotsman, I think I'd like to see language that is not subjective, because the way this is drafted, this is basically just weaponizing decorum to silence dissent, or, you know, from my perspective, silence someone when they are calling out a behavior, not a personal attack, but when they are calling out a behavior which is misleading the public, which I think is worthy of being called out. And just so you know, I will continue to do that, whether you consider that a personal attack or not. In fact, I'm so fed up with that behavior, which I have seen firsthand here for years since I've got sworn in, and I'm actually bringing forward a companion rules change regarding honesty. It's going straight to the floor, and it's going to basically require us to act as though we are under oath in a court of law at all times when we're on the dais, because I'm sick of it. I think the most disrespectful thing you can do is mislead the public. That is a complete lack of decorum, and it's a breach of public trust. So I'd like some more specificity if you're going to do this. Again, because the way it's set up, it's a way to just weaponize dissent, and it's unacceptable.
Councilmember Coombs.
That was Murillo.
Councilmember Murillo.
Drinsky.
It was actually Drinsky.
Councilmember Drinsky.
I just would like to further express my support for this and say that, yeah, we should be truthful to the public at all times, and calling the Republican Party a sadistic death cult, I don't find to be truthful. So I agree, we should be truthful, and I think that there's a lot of attacks, and I think that they're increasing for whatever reason. I think that they are increasing, and I think that rather than talking to each other, seeing where we can find some common ground, I think that this council is growing further and further divided, and I think that there maybe should be some more structured rules. But I would just like to know also from the city attorney's office, if this rule is violated, what happens?
And so there are two sections under E2. It's actually the chair or mayor's role to take control of the meeting and move the meeting on from the personal attack that's going on. So that becomes their responsibility. There is a later provision under what becomes under Appendix G becomes B, which is a council rule saying that you are to limit issues. So that again falls under the censure rules.
Further discussion? Is there opposition?
Mayor, I have.
Councilmember Combs.
So the concern I have here is that all it takes is to be the chair of the meeting to determine that you believe something to be a personal attack and therefore it should not be permitted to continue. And then furthermore, if someone were to appeal the decision of the chair, it simply takes a majority of the members present to silence that person. And so really what this does is create a really clear potential for a tyranny of the majority to say, we just don't want to hear what you have to say. And so we're going to weaponize the rules to shut you down because we don't want to hear what you have to say. And I think that many members on both sides of the aisle have made what could be considered personal attacks. Councilmember Jurinski, I think it's interesting that you are saying we should be just finding common ground when I opposed a policy that you supported, you made insinuations about my personal beliefs and that you felt you knew my personal beliefs before we had ever had a personal conversation. And so that to me seems like a personal attack, but I'm sure would be permitted. But calling that out, I'm sure, would not be permitted under these rules. And that's concerning to me that they can be selectively enforced and on political grounds.
I just want to say that, first of all, this policy works in the Colorado General Assembly and it works in the U.S. House of Representatives, and I believe it works in the Senate, U.S. Senate. I'm sorry, who's Mayor Pro Tem?
Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious what is a personal attack. When you call people names, that's disrespectful, and that's what we're talking about. So when you said about the appeal, so if the chair deems something to be inappropriate, I mean, you're basically just asking that person to stop and move on with the meeting. I guess if it persisted, I think we might have to go back to the rules and actually put in some more teeth, because that would, you could just keep on doing that. I think what we're looking at is trying to just bring some decorum to our city council, which is what the public deserves. Yes, sometimes people get, heated on issues, and sometimes people say things probably that they didn't mean to say, but I think we have an obligation to try to be, civil to each other. And there's nothing wrong with, you slip and somebody corrects you and asks you to not do that again. I think we're grown-ups, we can take that.
Further discussion.
Mayor.
What do you?
Councilmember Moreno.
Yeah, no, I want to voice my opposition and concern that this is just going to be a subjective way to, just selectively allow discourse or not. The prior conversation was around reducing public comment. This one is about subjectively enforcing what is allowable conversation. Like, I'm just concerned with the direction of many policies that we've had and discussions of late, but this one, is very clearly subjective. And I guess my question is, how are we going to regulate when it comes to decorum, screaming, talking over council members, and pounding a gavel? Because to me, that's 100% not decorum, and I've been on the receiving end of all of them. So I want that to be considered if this passes. But again, I think it's very subjective, because I'm sure the person doing that wouldn't agree that that was the case.
Councilmember McConnell, and then we'll get a sense of and then I'm going to get a sense of the council.
Thank you, Mayor. So I guess I want to reiterate my question to City Attorney Brotzman. Is this actually in keeping with the state rules and the rules in the U.S. House and U.S. Senate? If so, can we properly define? I want a non-subjective definition of what a personal attack is. And also, I just want to, respond to a comment that Councilmember Jurinski made, I guess, citing, one of my previous comments about the Republican Party. I also want to point out that you spent, I think, the better part of last year on local hate radio calling me a communist and saying I was evil and whatever else. So the rules of decorum, it cuts both ways here. We're either going to be polite and civil all times or we're not. And if y'all want to play in the mud, I'm happy to get in the mud with you. I don't believe in the high road. I watched President Obama get his head beat with the olive branch that he extended to the Republican Party for, you know, the better part of 8 years. So the way I was raised is, you know, you get bullies to stop bullying you by fighting back. So here I am. But I do want a clear definition on decorum before we move any of this forward. Because again, I think that basically this is the mayor trying to, you know, not only earlier silence public comment, but now trying to silence his opposition. So I just see a little bit of tyranny happening here. I don't like it. I do not support this. I think it needs more clarification. And I'd like to hear from the city attorney that that's something that he's going to be working on.
City attorney, and then I'll get a sense of the council.
So part of the sense of the council is whether it moves forward as is.
That's correct.
Or needs the additional piece. No matter what, Councilmember Morcano, we will draft the additional piece to allow you to make a motion if it shouldn't, if the majority doesn't decide to include it at this point.
Yeah. And is this, sorry, can you confirm that this is also what is in the State House, the State Senate, U.S. House and U.S. Senate, or is this something different?
No, we're going to steal the language directly from the state and from the House.
Okay.
US.
So in other words, you misled the public again. Thank you.
Very well. The question before us is whether or not to move item number 6C forward. Is there opposition?
Marcano.
Dina.
Woody Gill.
I've got Marcano, Medina, Coombs, and Murillo. Is there anybody else in opposition? Seeing none, then item number 6C will move forward. Reports by the mayor. Mayor has no report. Reports by council. Councilmember Lawson. Councilmember Lawson. Councilmember Gardner.
He left the meeting a while back.
Okay. Let's see. Councilmember Zvonek.
No report.
Councilmember Jorinsky.
No report.
Councilmember Murillo.
Just that my next town hall is Thursday, March 24th at the MLK Library, 6 to 7:30. Thanks.
Councilmember Sundgren. Sundberg, I'm sorry.
Just two upcoming town halls to tell you about. March 16th, the Wednesday before St. Patrick's Day. Traffic calming is the topic. As my grandma would say, people are driving like a bat out of you know where. And happy to have Carly there, the traffic manager, some APD, figure out why we're not writing good old-fashioned traffic tickets anymore. But town halls will be every other month for me instead of every month. And on May 19th, I thought you might like this one. It's going to be a panel discussion on metro districts, the pros, the cons, something in between, a moderated discussion on metro districts. Central Rec Center, May 19th, 6:30 p.m.
Councilmember Medina.
Yeah, just had a council town hall last Wednesday. Well attended, a lot of good discussion amongst community, and so far things were good. So thank you.
Councilmember O'Connell.
Thank you, sir. So I want to congratulate the Aurora Sister Cities organization. The El Salvador committee has selected Ilopango as the community that they will pursue a sister city relationship with. Ilopango is a suburb located to the east of San Salvador next to Lake Ilopango. And the Aurora Sister Cities had a launch celebration for the new committee last Wednesday, and I want to thank Councilmember Coombs, the mayor, and others who were able to attend to support the organization in their good work. Unfortunately, I'm still recovering from a surgery, so it's a little hard for me to be out and about. Speaking of which, our next Ward 4 meeting is going to be this Thursday, March 10th at 6:30. We'll be back in person for this meeting at Colorado Early Colleges, and that's located at 1400 South Abilene Street. Those of y'all who've been around for a while probably know that as the Ecotech building. So we're going to be right in the same spot my predecessor, Councilmember Richardson, used to have his meetings at. We're going to be getting an update from Arapahoe County on the formation process of the Arapahoe County Health Department. So we're going to have council members Bill Holen and Jeff Baker attend. And then we're also going to be talking about permanent supportive housing and a couple of other things relevant to the city. So I hope to see y'all there.
Councilmember Coombs.
I will be having my next town hall meeting at Central Recreation Center on March 15th at 6 p.m. And we will be having a discussion on the camping ban and enforcement of camping bans and impacts in other cities where they have occurred, as well as an update from the Animal Services Division on the changes to the animal code that we recently passed as a council. As far as boards and committees, as I mentioned, Dr. Cog had a conversation about our legislative agenda, including the now indefinitely delayed bill on reducing single occupancy vehicle trips, as well as an update on the RTD, Reimagine RTD process, and discussion of the tip policy. For Visit Aurora, we do not have a March meeting, but at the February meeting, we approved the contract for the executive director for 5 years. And the organization also has developed a monthly pulse report that will provide visitor trends, and that report will be shared with city staff and the city council later this month. So be looking for that in your email. It helps to demonstrate what kinds of places our visitors from out of state are going to in the city. And that concludes my report.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I just want to say that I had requested a statement for Ukraine, what's happening there on behalf of the council. And so I'm just going to read what the statement that we have to put out. The city of Aurora stands with our residents who have connections to Ukraine and those affected by conflict and violence. Our hope is for peace and dignity for all people, and that it may come without delay. The horrors of war, the strife of divided families, and the stress of the unknown are burdens that can take a significant toll. We encourage everyone to seek out friends, neighbors, or professional assistance to discuss and process current events. Available resources include the Aurora Mental Health Center, 303-617-2300, and Colorado Crisis Services, 844-493-8255. And then for my reports, E470, we did hire a new executive director. Tim Stewart did resign from E470 for family illness in his home state of Oklahoma. We hired Bo Memory, who is very qualified and will be starting in another, I think it's another 30 days or so. We also renegotiated a contract or agreement with HPTE. Then the roadway committee for E470, we discussed guardrail contract, the roadside maintenance contract, construction management contract, and then also a City of Aurora annexation petition. And then also I'm on the ARDA board, and in that meeting we discussed engineering and construction matters. Also, we had an update from Aurora Highlands. There was financial matters discussed, some financial statements, and then we also went into an executive session for legal advice. And then on Mile High Flood District, we said goodbye to the executive director, Ken McKenzie, who had been there for over a decade and done a remarkable job. And then the other things that were discussed were drainage and flood control authorizations. One of them in particular to Aurora is the West Tollgate Creek planning study. And then and then I was also on the Aurora Economic Development Council, attended both the executive meeting and the regular meeting, and got updates from them on some projects. So lastly, my town hall is on March 23rd at Heritage Eagle Bend Clubhouse, and we will have a presentation on development in Ward 6. And that's it.
Thank you, everybody. Meeting adjourned.